Okay, so hello and welcome to today's webinar, Automate Provisioning of New Hosts via Orcharhino. My name is Martin Grunde. I'm a consultant at the Atix AG, and my field of work encompasses everything related to computing clusters and the processes there and the automation. This includes configuration management with Ansible Puppet, cloud topics, and of course, complete lifecycle management of hosts via Orcharhino, our in-house tool, which we will use for this webinar. So just let me share the presentation. So let's do this. Perfect. Okay. Now you should see the slides. As the name already suggests, today's webinar is centered around the question, how can you automate the provisioning of new hosts, new servers with the help of Orcharhino? I want to introduce Orcharhino to you and explain the different available pathways of deploying your hosts. For your overview, the webinar is separated into two different parts. In the first part, I will give an introduction to the Orcharhino and the associated host deployment. I will show you why one should automate these processes and what is the benefit of this and how you can achieve this with Orcharhino. This is a short slide presentation, about 10 minutes. And the second part will be a live demonstration on our demo system. I will show you how fast it is to deploy hosts with Orcharhino and image and network-based deployment on our vSphere. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat. I will try to answer any open questions after the corresponding parts. At the end of the session, there will be a answer question round, but until then, please keep your cameras and micro shut off because these parts will be recorded and the last part won't. Okay, so without further ado, let's start with the first part of the webinar with the presentation and the question why you should automate the deployment of your hosts and how Orcharhino can help you with that and how this is done. Well, see. Now, okay. Well, first, as a short introduction, why should you automate the task of provisioning your hosts? Why is this or could this be a good idea and what are the benefits of this? Well, automation is always a good idea if you have many tasks you have to attend to, and if these tasks are very tedious and error-bound. Instead of, well, doing this task by hand, you can implement and review a workflow and just execute this workflow, so to say, with the push of a button. And the advantage of this, of course, is it's faster, it's safer, because you can review this workflow and you can always guarantee that you have the same results once you have reviewed it. What does this mean in the context of, well, data center maintenance? Well, let's have a look at an example you might be familiar with. For example, a colleague from a different apartment informs you that you need a bunch of servers, let's say 10-year servers. And of course, time is of the essence, and they want to have them as fast as possible. Deploying the service manually does not only consume a significant amount of your time, but you might potentially miss some critical configuration steps. If you would just instead have to, well, let's say, enter a handful of configuration, let's call them key points, and start your automation, that would definitely alleviate much of the stress associated with these tasks. And in order to do that, you can use, of course, the tools available to you from your environment. You might perhaps have some virtualization environments like OVIRT or KVM, or you might use vSphere. We'll see this later. Or you have some cloud environments like Azure or Google Cloud Platform or AWS. So, however, it would be much more advantageous to combine all these tools under one management and have some kind of central, well, let's say, front end to this. And this is where Orcharhino can help. Orcharhino can help you to, well, combine all these tools under its hood and do the deployment of your hosts for you. But of course, this is not only limited to the deployment of your hosts. This is also true for configuration management. For example, let's say you have a few web servers and you want to change the configuration of your web servers all at once. Instead of doing this manually again or using some PowerShell, something like that, you can use a configuration management tool to do this for you, which automatically checks the configuration and deploys the changes where applicable. Prominent names here are tools like Salt, Ansible, or Puppet. And once again, Orcharhino can help you with that and can combine these tools and be a front end for these tools. So you can do this from a central point of view. Or let's have a look at patch management. In your IT landscape, you have normally quite a few hosts with perhaps varying operating systems. Perhaps you have perhaps Debian-based systems like Ubuntu, Debian itself, or Red Hat-based systems like Red Hat itself, CentOS, Alma, Rocky Linux. You might have SUSE Linux, might have Oracle Linux. So you have quite a variety of operating systems. And now you have to ensure that all your systems are up to date and get the latest and, of course, safest, best software. And doing this by hand is near impossible. Once again, Orcharhino can help you with that. Not only can you synchronize the repositories you want to deploy to your host via Orcharhino and can use it as a kind of mirror. Additionally, you have the capabilities of using release managements, which means you can group your different servers into different lifecycle environments. And you might, for example, you might want to test your software first in your development environment and then push the changes made to the available software or packages for your systems to your test and productive environments. And therefore, Orcharhino provides you with the capabilities to group your hosts into these different environments and then, push the changes from one environment to the next. So you can first develop no software, test it on your systems, and then roll it out to your productive environments where you don't want anything to happen to the servers at all, anything bad. So as you can see, Orcharhino is able to support the complete life cycle of your servers, of your hosts, starting from the initial deployment and the configuration management to the patch management. What does this mean in detail? Well, I've brought this slide for you here too, where you can see all the different capabilities or providers which can be combined in the Orcharhino. So all these operating systems shown here are supported by the Orcharhino. We have the different configuration management tools again, and the lower part, you see the different providers available to Orcharhino. So Orcharhino can provide your servers to your environments. And we at the ADEX, of course, want to support you with that. Therefore, we offer different services. Of course, we have our support for all our customers. We have trainings, courses, quite true. And the first, and in order to alleviate the first step with Orcharhino, we have our training support. We have consulting. This ranges from initial concept development for your cluster automation to implementation and problem solution. And of course, we have our engineering department. You might be aware that the Orcharhino is based on the open source tool Foreman. So our engineers are in exchange with the Foreman community. So, and all this together is the Orcharhino. So, and given the fact that you have different providers and different, let's say, places where you can deploy your host at, there are different paths available to deploy your host, depending on your scenario, on how you want to deploy your host. So what does this mean in detail? Well, there are three, let's say, paths available to deploy your host in the Orcharhino. The first one shown on this slide is applicable for bare metal system. It's the discovery image-based path or discovery-based path. What does this mean? Well, this is very interesting for your on-premise data center. So let's say you get a new server and connect it to your data center. Then the server will receive a small discovery image and will boot from this image. And due to the configuration contained in the image, the server will then contact the Orcharhino, and you will then have a list available of all newly registered hosts and can define which host should be configured and in which way. You can, for example, say, okay, I have a new host here. I already connected it to my data center, and now I want to install Alma Linux on it or Rocky Linux based on the list of newly registered hosts. Then the Orcharhino will deliver the corresponding provisioning templates to the host. This depends on the operating system you selected. So, for example, for Red Hat based, you have the Kickstart, or if you have other systems like Debian-based, Ubuntu, whatever, you have the Preseed or the AutoYast. And then these templates will be delivered to the host in combination with the corresponding installation media. And then installation will start, and you will end with your new host with the operator system so selected. So this is the first path available. Then we have a second path, which is the image-based path. And this path starts from the Orcharhino is shown here. So you can do this, for example, via the web GUI, and you select to create a new host. And then you say you want to create this host from an image. What does this mean? Well, essentially, this is available for virtual hosts, and you can say you clone your virtual machine you want to create from an image. Everyone who already is familiar with the deployment in the cloud, this is the typical way you do this, for example, in AWS too. So what will happen here is you have this image available, you create your cloned virtual machine, and then the final configuration, the last bits, the last part will be done via user data and finished via SSS connection. So in this image, you have already contained all your relevant software, all your relevant configuration. The last bits will be done by the user data, and then you will end with your new host. And then this is the second path, and then we have the third path. This is the non-image-based path. What does this mean? Well, this means you want to create a new machine. This can be both virtual machine or bare metal. And then you have to, well, provide the machine with its network configuration. This can be done network-based via a DHCP, so that the host gets the configuration from this server. This can be a DHCP you use externally or the one in Orcharhino. Or the other option is you use a boot disk-based approach. This means that the host will be provided with a small boot disk image, and this image contains the relevant data for the configuration. And then from this point on, the host will be provisioned with its installation media, and again, with its provisioning templates, it will install, and then you will end with your new host and, with your selected operating system. Okay. So much for the different deployment paths available in Orcharhino. If you have any further questions, you can always have a look at the documentation, which is publicly available here. And of course, you can always have a look at our webinar and event homepage for any further webinars for the different topics regarding Orcharhino. So much to the webinar, to the presentation. Let's have a look. Are there any questions? Okay, nothing urgent. Then let's start with the second part of our live demonstration. Just set me this part up. Okay. Someone here. There. And there. Okay. So you should see now the second screen. Okay. Then let's start with the live demonstration. Excuse me for the delay. Okay, so what you see here is our test Orcharhino, our test system, and this is the host overview page. This Orcharhino is directly connected to our vCenter, and you see there are already a bunch of hosts deployed here with varying operating systems. So we have from IMA Linux here, Oracle, RHEL, Rocky Linux, SLES, and even some Windows hosts. And now I want to show you how easy and fast it is to deploy a new host with Orcharhino once configured. So I select here this create host create host button, sorry. And let's select the name for the host. Yes, we will choose just this name, which we have here. What shall we install? Let's say we want to install Rocky Linux version 9. And now I select the host group, and you see all the other options here are now filled out automatically. This is because the host group is some kind of container containing all the relevant setup required from Orcharhino to deploy your host. So Now we want to deploy a Rocky Linux 9 host named Greg Teixeira. And we have a look at this operating system tab. Here we see, and here we see provisioning network, creating method. So we use here a network-based approach, which is this DHCP-based approach. And now we want to generate this virtual machine and want to boot it, want to install it, and want to configure it. So let's start with that. So we now see the different steps here, like creating the DHCP settings for the host, which is relevant here for our path, configuring of the TFTP so that the host gets all its provisioning templates. So we just wait a moment, and now our host is generated and should now boot and start installation process. And in order to do that, we just have a look at the host. Perfect. So I will show this to you here. So I've connected to the host, and you see the host has already started booting. So it already got its installation here, but a little bit too slow to show you the TFTP part. And you see it now starts booting and should soon start the installation process here, Rocky Linux 9. And this is all we have to do to actually deploy the host. Everything else is already configured. And this is the network-based deployment approach. So what we do now is just have to wait until everything is finished and our host is ready. So just let's keep it here and let's use the time the host needs to boot up to deploy a second host. But this time we want to use a different deployment method, a different deployment path. So instead of using this network-based approach, let's use a boot disk-based approach. Okay, once again, I will stick with the name selected here. The organization is fine, the location is fine. And just for comparison, let's say we want Rocky Linux, but this time we want boot disk-based approach. So as I showed you, there are quite some differences between these two approaches, even if they result in the same host in the end. And naturally, if you just would do this manually, you would have to adjust the different steps here, make sure that the host gets this ISO instead of the network configuration via DHCP. And here in Orcharhino, all I have to do is to select the new method and submit. And we now see there's an ISO generated and uploaded to the data store. This will take a short amount of time until it's uploaded and available. So let's give the Orcharhino a moment. Okay, now it's uploaded. Now it will configure the TFTP server, attach the ISO to the CD-ROM drive of the virtual machine. And here we go. And now we have our second host here, which uses a different deployment path. Let's have a look at this host too. Once again, open the console, and we see that's quite the same. Here our host has gotten our boot ISO. Now it's booted into the available installation media, which is now deployed in the next step to the host. And now we'll start the installation process again. So same outcome, different path, one click in the Ocarina. And that's it. In order to show you that, so then let's just wait a short amount of time until the host is finished with the installation. So I can show you that not fixed, but the hosts are really deployed here live. And we will use the time to have a short look at a few configuration steps here in the Ocarina. So you might get an overview over the crucial steps in host deployment. So what you see here is the interface we had before for the deployment of our hosts. And here you see the organization location, which were pre-selected. These are just, let's call it, ways to group your hosts, more or less. So if you have different organizations, you can put them here. And if you have perhaps different data centers, you can configure your different locations. Here, this is our vCenter, which we deploy on. Here we have the lifecycle environment and the content view and the content source, which is relevant for the software deployed to the Ocarina and the different life cycles for patching. Here is some Puppet configuration and Salt configuration. I don't want to go into detail for the configuration management tools. Here, this will be a different webinar, but let's say you can use it to configure your host, and here you have the salt states and rows and the Puppet configuration for that. What's more interesting is the virtual machine. For example, here you see the configuration for the virtual machine itself and the cluster from the vCenter. You see how big the machine is, how many CPUs, RAM, disk space, controller configuration. And here you see all relevant to the operating systems. Here you would also have the image-based deployment. For example, if you want to deploy into the cloud, you have the architecture and operating system. And of course, after the initial configuration of the host, it will get its installation media, which you can figure here, which can be one you put here or online source or from a synced repository in some cases. Partition table, the PXE loader, and of course you can set the root password here. Then we have our interface configuration, which we have here, which is essentially our complete network setup, like the IPs. We have configured our DNS with this here. We have our IP address, and of course the connection type and the network, connection and the NIC type and the network, sorry. We have some additional parameters we can use for the deployment, and of course is the user. Then let's go over here. You can see here, this is our dashboard in the Ocarina, where you see the overview of our whole hosts. Please don't mind these no report hosts. This is a demo system, and we intentionally keep some of the systems in a bit older state in order to show patching, for example. So we don't have 100% okay here. Here under content is our content management, where you have your products, which mean your repositories, your software you want to sync. And here, this is the relevant part. For this webinar, here you have the complete configuration for your host regarding installation media, operating system, architectures. And as you can see, if you have a look at here, there are quite a few operating systems in here. So then we have a few configuration parts, which is for Ansible, Salt, and Puppet. And here for our infrastructure part, this is the relevant part in order to configure your providers for the Ocarina. So if I show you this here, compute resources, you see it's connected to the vCenter and our Proxima. So here actually two compute resources configured. And here we have the associated compute profiles, which are relevant for the virtual machines. So what does that mean? Well, these profiles contain the information of how we want to deploy the virtual machines, how big or small they are. And then this is, of course, fairly small. It's a very small compute profile, which means you have one CPU, you have one core per socket, and 1 gig RAM. Okay, so much as an overview. Let's go back to our host. Let's start with the Tixera. And you see now our host has finished. The host is now booted into the system. I can log in if I want to. And we have our Rocky Linux here. And of course, the host is now connected to the Ocarina. And in this case, the Ocarina advises us to do an additional update for few security errata in the future. Okay, and that's it. Our host is now finished and ready to use. Good.